Hello. My name is Mayrose Vale, and on the day I graduated college, my mother gave me a gift. She called it independence. What she meant was exile. No hugs. No cake. Just my suitcase dumped on a wet lawn and the front door locked behind me. The Uber pulled away just as I stepped into the soaked grass, my graduation gown dragging against my ankles, already damp. There were no balloons. No congratulations. No familiar voices waiting at the door. Instead, I saw my two suitcases, cheap, worn, the one with the broken zipper hanging open, lined up on the front lawn like they had been evicted, like me. I didn't move. For a second, I thought maybe I was early. Maybe they were inside lighting candles or taping a banner on the wall. But then the porch light flicked on. And the door opened. She stood there. Valora Quinn, my mother. Perfectly pressed blouse, flawless makeup, expressionless. Her voice was steady. Too steady. "That's your graduation gift, Mayrose," she said. "Independence." And then, click. The door shut before I could ask what that meant. I stood in the rain, not quite shivering, not quite breathing. My fingers went cold before I could reach for the doorknob again. I knocked. Softly. No answer. Again. Silence. I should have yelled. Banged. Demanded. But all I could do was stare at the door, at the light that had been turned off now, just as deliberately as she had spoken those words. I lowered my arm. My shoulder trembled, but not from the cold. Independence. It didn't sound like a gift. It sounded like a sentence. I dragged my suitcases across the wet grass to the only dry spot I could find, under the cherry tree. The same one I used to climb when I was 7, back when I thought my mother's silence meant she was busy, not disappointed. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it like it was a lifeline. One message: university payment reminder, tuition balance pending. No messages from her. No missed calls. Not even from my father, Heath, who used to leave oranges in my backpack during finals week. The phone felt heavier than it should have. I looked up at the second-story window, Lior's room. A soft glow behind the curtain. He was home. My brother. He always was. I imagined him scrolling, probably laughing at something on Reddit while I sat outside like a stranger to my own family. I whispered, "It's fine." But it wasn't. I pulled the gown tighter around me, still wearing the sash. Valedictorian. Full ride, at least the first year. I'd scraped and clawed for every credit. Worked night shifts at the bookstore, skipped meals, skipped holidays. I wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding. That if I waited long enough, the door would open, and someone would say, "Mayrose, don't be silly. Come in, we have cake." But nothing happened. The TV inside laughed again. The muffled cadence of Valora's voice. Calm. Dismissive. I reached into the side pocket of my suitcase and pulled out the letter I'd written her last month. It had never been opened. The edge still sealed. I had folded it myself, trying to make it look perfect, trying to make it look like something worth reading. A breeze rustled the tree. The letter slipped from my hand into a puddle. I didn't pick it up. My fingers went numb around the handle of the suitcase. The one I bought with babysitting money. I sat down on the curb, the pavement biting through the thin fabric of my gown. I didn't cry. Not then. Because part of me had expected this. Somewhere deep inside, I had known. For years, I had been slowly erased. My name said less and less at family gatherings. Lior was the one they toasted. I was the one who volunteered to take the picture. I was the one who edited the photo, cropped out my own arm from the corner. I think the erasure had started long before tonight. And yet, it still hurt like a fresh wound. I pulled my knees to my chest and rested my chin there. The rain soaked my hair, my collar, my skin. I let it. It was the only thing touching me gently. A car drove past. Then another. I didn't wave. I didn't look up. The porch light stayed off. I opened my phone again. No new messages. Just that one bill, staring back like it knew I didn't have the money. Like it knew I wouldn't dare ask again. My reflection in the screen was blurry. Raindrops clung to the edge. I looked pale. Smaller. Like I was being washed away by something too big to fight. I repeated her word. Independence. And this time, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like exile. By the time dawn broke, I was still curled in the driver's seat, knees tucked beneath my graduation gown, which now smelled like wet wool and defeat. My back ached from the angle I'd folded into, but I hadn't dared recline the seat. The parking lot behind the gas station felt too exposed, like if I let my guard down, even for sleep, I might disappear altogether. The air inside the car was sour with damp polyester and that fake vanilla air freshener I'd bought last semester when the heater started blowing moldy air. Every breath clung to the cold, and my fingers stayed wrapped around my phone, the screen dark for hours now. I had no charger, mine had frayed months ago, and the clerk inside the gas station had offered to plug it in behind the counter. No questions. Just a glance at my face, then a quiet nod. I don't know if I looked like someone running away or someone who had nowhere left to run to. The seats were peeling where the fabric had torn, years of friction and quiet shame. This car had once taken me to science fairs and summer jobs. Now it held every piece of my life not left behind on my mother's lawn. A vibration startled me, my phone, halfway recharged. A message glowed on the screen. You missed orientation today. You okay? Amber leaving. The professor who had vouched for my assistantship. She had been the one person on that faculty who noticed when I submitted lab reports handwritten because our printer broke, and I couldn't afford a new one. I stared at her message for a full minute. I typed, family stuff. I'll be there tomorrow. Then I backspaced every word. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted to stop needing anything from anyone. I set the phone down in my lap and looked at the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, not from tears, but from holding them back too long. There's a burn that comes from swallowing your voice for too many years. In the glove box, I reached for the graduation tassel. It had hung from the mirror until last night. Now, it felt like a joke. I folded it gently, slowly, and placed it beside the crumpled orientation schedule. There was a knock. A flashlight beam pierced the fogged window. I rolled it down halfway. You okay in there, ma'am? A police officer. Not aggressive, just tired. I'm just resting, I said. He nodded. His eyes lingered on the gown in the back seat, the bags in the passenger seat, the way my fingers twitched against the steering wheel. But he didn't push. Try not to stay too long. We get complaints. I understand. When he left, I watched him drive away until his taillights disappeared. Then I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. A soft ache settled into my stomach. I hadn't eaten since the university breakfast, the one I skipped. There'd been a pastry table. Leor had texted a photo of his plate. Look what you're missing. I remember staring at it in the cafeteria bathroom, then walking right back out the exit. I reached for my emergency card. $11.78 left. I could either fill half the tank or buy instant soup. Not both. That kind of math had become second nature. I chose the soup. Inside the gas station, the man behind the counter didn't flinch. He watched me pick a cup of noodles and a bottle of water. I placed them on the counter. He rang them up. We didn't speak. He reached behind the register and handed me my charger without me asking. Thanks, I said. He nodded once. You got somewhere to go? I'm figuring it out. He didn't press. Just gave a small, understanding nod. Quiet like someone who'd been through things and knew silence wasn't always a lack of story, it was a shield. Back in the car, I sipped the broth slowly, careful not to spill. The heat against my palms made me want to cry. I didn't. Instead, I thought about the kitchen table. About the tuition form I had printed 3 months ago. I placed it beneath the stack of junk mail on purpose, hoping Valora would notice. She had. And she'd said, without looking up from her magazine, we've decided to focus on Leor. He's a better investment. Investment. Like love was a stock portfolio, and I hadn't earned dividends. I didn't scream then. I just nodded and folded the paper back into my folder. I had rewritten that moment in my head so many times, giving myself better lines, braver reactions. But the truth was, I had already learned that in our house, silence wasn't an accident, it was a punishment. And I had stopped trying to make noise a long time ago. Now, in this parking lot, I made a choice. I wouldn't scream here either. I'd drive. I'd get to campus. I'd show up for orientation, even if it was late. I'd pretend I had somewhere to return to when it was over. Because if I couldn't rewrite their past, I'd write my own future. Slowly. Gently. I opened the glove box again, pushed aside the tassel, and found the tiny notepad I used to list grocery sales. On the first page, I wrote, Day 1, not gone. Just moving. As the sky began to pale, the first streaks of sunrise barely pushing through the clouds, I turned the ignition. The car sputtered once. Then again. Then it caught. Softly, I whispered to myself, let's go. The city was still damp when I parked the car near the bus terminal. Clouds hung low and heavy, the kind that promised another storm by afternoon. I sat for a moment, staring at the cracked vinyl on the steering wheel, fingers numb from gripping it too tight. My throat ached from not speaking. When I finally stepped out, the air bit my skin, sharp, metallic, like Portland after a long rain. The bus was already half full. I slipped inside and found a seat near the window, clutching my backpack on my lap like it might keep me afloat. The aisle smelled of stale coffee, fabric softener, and exhaustion. People murmured, coughed, shuffled. I envied them, their normalcy, their destinations. The bus jolted forward. I watched raindrops crawl down the window, racing each other until they vanished into the blur of streetlights. The sound of the tires on wet asphalt was rhythmic, almost soothing. Gently, quietly, the city unfolded, old storefronts, bright signs, houses lined with roses still dripping from the storm. Across the aisle, a boy around 16 chewed gum too loudly. He turned, his eyes curious. You a teacher or something? I blinked. No. Student. He pointed to my gown folded in the seat beside me. Didn't look like a student. You look older. I smiled weakly. Feels that way. He nodded and went back to his music. The question lingered though, small and cruel. Older. Tired. Worn. That's what he meant. And maybe he wasn't wrong. When the bus stopped near campus, I hesitated before standing. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step toward the door sounded louder than it should have. The pavement squished under my shoes. I remembered another walk, different year, same drizzle, when Leor got his first car. A silver sedan with a red ribbon. We trust him with wheels, my mother had said, smiling at Dad. He's earned it. Then she turned to me. You? You're not ready yet. It hadn't been about readiness. It was about permission, who deserved to move forward and who didn't. I learned quietly, slowly, that love in our house was currency, and I was always broke. Inside the main building, I found the lecture hall. The door creaked when I pushed it open, announcing me before I wanted it to. Heads turned. I kept mine down, finding an empty seat in the back. The professor glanced my way, eyes flickering just long enough to register my lateness, then moved on. I took notes anyway. My pen shook slightly against the paper. Halfway through, a girl leaned toward me. Didn't you just graduate? I forced a small laugh. Yeah. Starting a second program. She smiled politely but looked unconvinced. People like her didn't understand starting over wasn't ambition, it was survival. When the class ended, I waited until the room emptied before gathering my things. My name sounded from the doorway. Mayrose? I looked up. Dr. Amber leaving. Gray curls, steady gaze. She held a folder in her hands. You missed orientation, she said, voice calm but deliberate. I know, I answered, fumbling for words. Something came up. She handed me the folder. I kept your application open. I believe in patterns. Yours tells me you're a survivor. Her words hit harder than I expected. My chest tightened. I nodded, unable to find anything adequate to say. She smiled faintly. Come see me after lab hours. We'll talk about your schedule. When she left, I stood there, letting the echo of her heels fade. For the first time in weeks, someone had said my name without disdain. It felt almost soft. In the lab, everything hummed, the low buzz of machines, the whir of centrifuges. I focused on the rhythm, on repetition. Tubes spun, timers beeped, gloves snapped. It was easier to concentrate on motion than memory. Hours later, when the building emptied, I filled out the enrollment forms. My hand cramped halfway through. On the back of the last page, I noticed something printed in small letters, emergency housing application. I hesitated. Then folded it neatly and slipped it into my backpack. Not yet. But maybe soon. The campus lights flickered as I stepped outside. It was late, too late for buses, too early to call it night. I walked toward the student union, the sound of my wet shoes echoing across the concrete. A vending machine stood near the door. I pressed a button and watched a granola bar spiral down. It hit the tray with a hollow thud, louder than expected. I laughed softly to myself. Tiny victories count when you have so few. Sitting on a bench, I tore the wrapper and ate slowly, each bite dry and sweet. Above me, the sky cleared just enough to show a sliver of moon. My stomach settled, my thoughts didn't. I checked my email on the campus Wi-Fi. There it was. Welcome to the Applied Genetics Research Track. Please confirm housing preference within 48 hours. My thumb hovered over the options. No preference felt safest. I clicked it. Anywhere, I whispered, is better than nowhere. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined a door that didn't close behind me. A place where silence meant peace, not punishment. Slowly, gently, I allowed myself to believe such a place could exist. But even as hope formed a small pulse inside me, a familiar dread coiled underneath. I knew them. My family had a way of finding whatever light I built and calling it theirs. 2 weeks passed before they found another way to reach me. I had almost begun to believe the quiet was permanent. It was a calm that stretched thin but held, until that Friday evening, when I turned the corner of the dorm hallway and froze. A small white bakery box sat in front of my door. The note taped crookedly on top read, "We're proud of you. Come home when you're ready." 3 signatures followed, Mom, Dad, and Leor. The smell hit me first, buttercream and artificial vanilla, the kind of sweetness that hides something rotten underneath. I didn't need to open it to know the gesture wasn't about love. It was about appearance. The hallway smelled of bleach and leftover cafeteria food, but this box? This was guilt, sugar-coated and tied with a bow. I crouched down slowly. My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard from any of them in weeks, not after graduation, not after they threw my things into the rain. And now, this? A peace offering or a performance? I couldn't tell. My hand hovered above the lid. I imagined Valora ordering it from the same bakery she used for my 10th birthday. Chocolate fudge, white icing. Back then, the cake had my name piped across the top in careful cursive, "To our bright girl." The next year, the bakery box said "Congratulations, Leor." And it never changed again. When I finally lifted the lid, the smell was identical. Same icing. Same handwriting on the card inside, "We knew you'd land on your feet. Your brother said you got your own place now." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. They had heard about my new apartment from him, not me. Of course. Even my success had to travel through Leor's mouth before it was considered real. I closed the box and slid it under the bed. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. Part of me wanted to keep it, to remind myself what fake affection looked like when it was delivered in white cardboard. My phone buzzed an hour later. A notification from Facebook. I opened it and felt the breath leave my chest. So proud of my daughter, our little scientist. All that parenting paid off. The post came from Valora's account. Attached was an old photo of me at 12, wearing a toy lab coat I'd bought from a thrift store with babysitting money. She hadn't been there that day. Dad had taken the picture. But now, under her caption, the comments poured in. "You raised her right, Valora. Such a beautiful, smart girl. Mother of the Year." I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. They hadn't changed. They never would. They just saw an opportunity to reclaim the daughter they'd disowned, now that her name looked respectable online. My phone rang. I hesitated before answering. It was Jenna, an old neighbor. "Did you reconnect with your folks?" she asked brightly. "I saw that post, so sweet." I pressed my lips together. "It's sweet when it's real," I said. The silence that followed told me she understood, or maybe she didn't. Either way, I hung up before she could ask more. For a while, I sat on the floor, back against the bed frame. The air felt heavy, thick with that same sickly sweetness from the cake. My heartbeat was steady, not frantic. This wasn't shock anymore. It was recognition. I opened my laptop, created a folder on the desktop, and titled it Receipts. Inside, I saved screenshots, the Facebook post, the comments, the timestamp. A small act of rebellion. Quiet. Careful. Controlled. They had written the narrative for years. This time, I would keep the record. As I scrolled, another post appeared. Leor had shared Mom's status with the caption, "Couldn't be prouder of my sister." The irony nearly made me laugh. He had never congratulated me privately, not once. I remembered Christmas the year he got his scholarship. He had unwrapped a watch. I got socks. Valora had said, "You're the practical one, Mayros. You don't need fancy things." That night, I washed the dishes while they watched a movie, the laughter echoing down the hall. "You're always so serious," she'd called out. "No one likes a martyr." Those words still echoed, even now, years later, with the glow of her post lighting my face. I typed a message in the comment box under her post: "Please don't use my image without consent." I stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling just slightly. Then I deleted it before sending. Not yet. Anger is a strange companion. It sits beside you quietly, pretending patience, until one day it speaks. Mine hadn't spoken yet, but I could hear it breathing. I turned off the phone and crawled onto the bed. Through the thin dorm wall, someone's laughter filtered from the next room, a carefree sound, the kind that used to make me flinch. Now, it felt distant, almost kind. I closed my eyes. I thought about my mother's face that day in the rain, her tone so casual it could have been mistaken for kindness. Independence, she had said, like she was giving me freedom, not exile. And yet here she was again, trying to attach herself to the version of me that had survived without her. It was strange how control could disguise itself as pride. How love could sound like ownership. I reached under the bed and pulled the box closer. My fingers pressed against the cold cardboard. The icing inside had probably hardened by now. Still, it smelled fresh, too fresh. Like it didn't belong here, like it was waiting for a photo op that never came. Quietly, gently, I whispered, "Not this time." I wasn't going to call. I wasn't going to thank her. I wasn't going to apologize for her discomfort or explain my distance. This time, I would let the silence belong to me. As I drifted toward sleep, I imagined her seeing the unread message I almost sent. Maybe she'd think I was ignoring her. Maybe that would sting. Or maybe she'd twist it into another story, how her ungrateful daughter couldn't even acknowledge kindness. Either way, I didn't owe her a narrative. For the first time in months, I slept without checking my phone. When I woke, the early light stretched across the carpet, catching on the bakery box. I almost kicked it accidentally. I considered it, throwing it out, dumping it in the trash. But something stopped me. I wanted her reminder there, under the bed, not as guilt but as evidence. Proof that manipulation could be wrapped in frosting and called affection. I got up, showered, and dressed for work. In the mirror, my eyes looked tired but steady. Before leaving, I pulled out my phone, opened her message thread, and typed one line. "Please don't use my name to fix your reputation." I didn't send it. Not yet. But I saved it in drafts, ready. Because someday soon, I knew, I'd have to draw the line not just in silence, but in writing. That evening, as I locked my door, I glanced once more at the box. It was just sitting there, quiet and ordinary, yet full of everything I refused to swallow again. Softly, I whispered to the empty hallway, "I see you, Valora. I see exactly what you're doing." The words felt like warmth against my tongue. Not rage, clarity. And that was the first night I dreamed of a home where no one else had keys. The next morning, I stood in the stairwell outside the lab, the cement cold under my shoes, phone pressed to my ear. The building was half empty, just the hum of air vents and the distant thud of doors closing as classes started. I took a deep breath and hit record. "If you try that again," I said, voice steadier than I expected, "we'll have a real problem." The message hung in the air for a second before I pressed send. My thumb trembled against the glass screen. It wasn't fear this time. It was release. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes. The echo of my own voice bounced off the stairwell, quieter now, like it already belonged to someone braver. They had made it clear I didn't belong in their lives. Until I did something worth bragging about. Then suddenly, I was useful again, an accessory for their self-image, a headline for their dinner conversations. It was almost funny, if you ignored the ache beneath it. After lab, I walked to the campus library, my head down, hands shoved into my coat pockets. I needed to check something that had been gnawing at the back of my mind since yesterday, when a friend from home mentioned my family's new venture. I logged into the public records database, fingers clicking nervously against the keyboard. A few minutes later, there it was, the Casten Research Initiative. My last name, not theirs. Filed by Valora Quinn, with Lior listed as the project manager. And right beneath the title, in neat print, the name Mayros Vale, Senior Genetic Consultant. I blinked. Scrolled again. The signature at the bottom was mine. Or someone's attempt at it. The air left my lungs all at once. My palms went cold. I whispered to myself, that's not my handwriting. The librarian at the next table glanced up. I smiled quickly, as if nothing had happened, then started printing the document. The machine whirred, slow and indifferent, while my pulse pounded in my ears. When I picked up the papers, my hands shook. My name was being used to legitimize a loan, one that would funnel straight into Lior's business. My success had become their safety net again. I sat at the nearest desk and wrote out a subject line before I could talk myself out of it. Subject: unauthorized use of identity. To University Legal Department. Attachments: filing documents, signatures, registration ID. In the body, I wrote only one sentence: I did not authorize the use of my name or credentials for this application. Please advise on next steps. I hovered over send. Then I clicked. It felt like stepping out of a shadow I hadn't realized I was still standing in. Later, as I walked back to the dorms, my phone rang. Valora's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Her voice was sharp, but coated in something sweet. We need to talk. This family can't survive this tension. I laughed quietly. The family survived without me just fine. Remember the rain? She paused, caught off guard. Don't be dramatic. You've always had a flair for that. I could hear Dad's voice in the background, low, muted, like always. Lior probably wasn't far either, waiting for Mom to smooth things over. I said, you forged my name. That's ridiculous, she replied, too fast. It's all for you, for the family. You'd understand if you weren't so. So what? I cut in. So independent? For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. I ended the call before she could recover. My heart was racing, but it wasn't panic. It was certainty. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the cake box still half hidden beneath it. The smell of sugar had dulled, replaced by something sour. I slid it out, opened it, and looked at the untouched frosting, the perfect script that spelled proud of you. Pride. Such a small word for something so easily weaponized. I carried the box to the trash chute and stood there, fingers tracing the lid one last time. Then I dropped it. The hollow thud that followed sounded like punctuation. Back in my room, I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched rain smear across the glass. My reflection looked older, steadier. The kind of person who had stopped waiting for apologies. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail from Valora. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I opened my email. The legal department had responded. We've received your report. Please provide any additional evidence of forgery or misuse of identity. All communication will remain confidential. I exhaled slowly. I had proof now. And a record. That night, I slept lightly, the kind of half-rest that comes after a storm. In the dream, I was back at that kitchen table, the one where Mom used to sit with her coffee, eyes scanning bills she'd never pay. In the dream, she was speaking into the phone again. Yes, we can include Mayrose's name on the proposal, she's a geneticist now. It'll look legitimate. Even asleep, I could hear the smug certainty in her tone. I woke up before the dream finished. Morning came gray and quiet. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and drafted another email, this one to the bank listed on the document. I attached the forged application, circled my name in red, added a note, this is not my signature. No threats, no anger. Just facts. When the call came again that afternoon, I let it ring out. Then the voicemail notification popped up. Her voice filled the tiny speaker. You're going to regret this, Mayrose. Families don't take kindly to betrayal. Betrayal. I almost laughed. I deleted the message, but the word lingered, echoing in my head as I walked down the hallway. Families don't take kindly to betrayal. Neither do daughters who finally stop pretending. By evening, I'd heard from the university's ethics board. The case was under review. They asked for a statement and proof of employment. I sent everything. The relief that followed wasn't joy, it was quiet power. I made dinner, instant rice and frozen vegetables. Ate at my desk. Outside, students were laughing, the sound of youth echoing in the courtyard. I felt older again, but not lonely. Just aware. Before bed, I scrolled through my emails one more time, then checked the voicemail folder. I played back my own message, the one I'd sent that morning. If you try that again, we'll have a real problem. I listened to my own voice, calm, measured, unshaken. Then, softly, I whispered, I meant every word. I turned off the light. As I passed the mirror, my reflection caught in the dark glass, steady and quiet. I realized I wasn't waiting for them to respect me anymore. I was building a world that didn't require their permission. Tomorrow, I'd call the investigator again. Tomorrow, I'd file the next report. But tonight, I let the silence stretch out, full and strong. Next time they show up here, I said to the empty room, I won't ask them to leave. I'll file a report. The words settled in the air, solid and real. And I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, they came. I knew they would, though I'd stopped trying to predict the form it would take. I had imagined letters. Maybe another public post. But I hadn't pictured this, all 3 of them on my doorstep, smiling like they hadn't once stood behind a locked door while rain soaked my skin. Valora held a white bakery box again, store-bought muffins, no doubt, the kind that taste like chalk and disappointment. Heath stood behind her, hands shoved deep into his jacket, his eyes fixed on the porch tiles like they were speaking to him. And Leor, of course Leor, wore a Patagonia vest over a pressed button-down, sunglasses tucked into his collar even though it was overcast. I didn't step aside. I didn't ask why they came. I simply said, you drove 3 hours across town. There's no neighborhood here. Valora didn't flinch. We were worried, she said smoothly, as if rehearsed. You've been so quiet. You taught me that, I replied. She smiled faintly, as though I had just made a clever joke. Then, without invitation, they walked in. Just like that. Past the threshold I'd built without them, into the quiet I'd fought to keep sacred. Valora's eyes swept the living room. This place feels like family money. I didn't blink. It feels like student loans and overnight shifts. No one responded. Instead, she wandered further, commenting on my choices like a realtor touring a home she didn't own. Heath found a seat at the kitchen table. Leor pulled out his phone, scrolling like none of this was out of line. The air was thick with something I couldn't name, not tension, not anger, but the weight of every unspoken thing they had never been forced to acknowledge. I walked to the kitchen counter and opened the drawer. From inside, I pulled the folder, thick, organized, damning. I placed it carefully on the table in front of Heath. Inside, the title deed to the house, payment receipts, the bank transfer logs. Tucked between them, the printed grant proposal, the Casten Research Initiative, featuring my name, forged in ink that tried to mimic my cursive. Valora stared down at it, then back at me. Are you threatening us? No, I said, steady. I'm warning you. This is me, on record. Leor scoffed. Come on, sis. We're family. Don't make this dramatic. You used my name, Leor, I said, my voice calm but firm. Your little startup used my credentials. Say thank you, or say nothing at all. He raised his hands like a magician caught in a trick. It's not that serious. Valora stepped in. We just needed help. We assumed you'd be willing. You've always been the sensible one. Sensible. That word again. The compliment used to keep me compliant. I breathed deeply. My hands didn't shake. I was sensible when you left me in the rain, I said. I was sensible when you ignored my scholarship letter. When you filed a loan application using my name. Valora's voice turned sharp. You would humiliate your family like this? You'd drag us through paperwork and courts and shame just to feel right? I tilted my head. You did that the day you locked the door behind me. There it was, the crack. Her face faltered. Heath finally spoke. We didn't mean for it to go that far. We just thought. You didn't think, I said, softer now. You assumed. Silence filled the space. It wasn't peace. It was the vacuum left when a lie can't hold itself up anymore. I walked to the door and opened it. You can go now. Valora stared at me like she didn't recognize my voice. This is not your house, I said. And I'm not your scapegoat anymore. They hesitated. Valora opened her mouth, closed it. Heath stood slowly. Leor didn't look at me. They left in silence, the door clicking behind them like a final sentence. I stood for a long time after they were gone. The house felt still again. My breathing evened out. I walked to the back window and looked out over the small yard. The trees swayed gently, branches tapping against the fence like they were reminding me I was still here, still standing. Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and saved a new file in the receipts folder. The file name, Final Visit, documented. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I did exhale. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. A week after they left, the quiet fractured again. It started with a ping. Then another. I didn't check right away. I was running samples in the lab, the hum of the centrifuge drowning out everything. But when I finally sat down that evening, the notifications stacked like dominoes across my phone. The Facebook posts had turned vicious. The lies had found legs. Valora had written, "Heartbroken when your own child forgets her roots. We sacrificed everything. That villa she lives in? Built on our support." Dozens of comments followed. Words like ungrateful, spoiled, some kids forget who raised them. Neighbors. Family friends. Even an old teacher who'd once told me I was the quiet one, but polite. I stared at the blue light of the screen until my eyes blurred. Not broken. Just still. I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. I just opened the folder on my laptop, receipts. Screenshots filled the screen, the grant documents, the voicemail recordings, the photo of my soaked suitcase from that night years ago. Evidence of every time they had rewritten the story and called it truth. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could expose them. One post would unravel the image they'd built. But I didn't want war, not their kind, not one fought in comment sections with strangers cheering from both sides. Instead, I began to compile. Organized. Precise. Each file I labeled quietly: tuition denial, motel expense, forgery record, public defamation. When I was done, I felt something close to calm. Boundaries weren't walls, they were documentation. A message popped up from an old neighbor. "Your mom is devastated. Maybe just call her? Life's short." I typed back, "Life's also long when people keep lying." I deleted it before sending. Then came the phone call I had been expecting. "Doctor leaving. You okay, Meros?" Her voice was gentle, careful. I exhaled. "No. But I'm free." She paused, understanding in her silence. "Keep your head down. People like that, when they lose control, they throw dust to blind whoever's watching." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll wear goggles." After hanging up, I sat in the dim glow of the laptop. The posts had already been shared dozens of times. My mother's voice, so honeyed in public, carried venom only I could taste. "You never know how cruel success can make people," she'd commented to one reply. "Pray for her. Pride is a dangerous disease." I whispered to the empty room, "Pride didn't build me. Survival did." That's when the knock came. Sharp. Repeated. I froze. It was nearly 9. The porch light spilled shadows across the front steps. Through the window, I saw 2 silhouettes, uniforms. Police. When I opened the door, one officer lifted his chin. "Ma'am, we received a report of possible elder abuse. Your mother claims you've been harassing her." I almost laughed. Of course she did. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "Mind if we step inside?" "Not at all." I gestured toward the dining table where my laptop was open, files neatly displayed. "I have documentation you'll probably want to see." They looked at each other, then followed me in. I clicked through folders, emails, voicemails, dated posts, legal correspondence. The older officer watched quietly, his expression softening as he read the timestamps. "This doesn't look like harassment," he said finally. "Looks like you've been targeted." I nodded once. "You can add that to your report." They took notes, asked routine questions, then left with an apology in their eyes. As the door closed behind them, I leaned against it and let out a long, slow breath. For a while, I just stood there in the quiet hum of the house. The rain outside had started again, a steady rhythm against the windows. I thought about my mother sitting somewhere composing another post, maybe crying to her audience, telling them about her ungrateful daughter who weaponized truth. I whispered softly, "You can't weaponize what's already been recorded." Before bed, I drafted one final email. Subject: formal notice, defamation and identity misuse. To Valora Quinn, Leor Casten. CC, Attorney, University Ethics Board. This is a formal notice regarding the ongoing misuse of my personal image, name, and professional credentials. Further attempts to publicly misrepresent or exploit my work will result in immediate legal action. I read it twice, steadying my breath. Then I hit send. My hands didn't shake. I used to think boundaries were cruel. That drawing lines meant you loved less. But I learned, quietly, that boundaries are the last form of love you give yourself when no one else will. The next morning, their posts were gone. Deleted. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence. Until evening, when the local news ran a small piece, family dispute leads to police visit in Portland Heights. They didn't use names, but everyone who knew us would understand. Valora had always feared scandal. Now she'd built one herself. My phone buzzed, messages from coworkers, classmates. You okay? Ignore it, people always twist things. I didn't answer any of them. I went outside instead. The air was cold, clean. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked. The world went on. Inside, the clock ticked softly. I sat on the couch, wrapped my arms around my knees, and stared at the rain streaking down the glass. It glittered under the porch light like silver threads. For once, I didn't feel fragile. I felt forged. A notification pinged again. Another message from my mother. I opened it. You're destroying this family. Call me before it's too late. I typed a single line, it was destroyed the day you lied to protect yourself. Then I deleted it, unsent. Some truths didn't need her audience anymore. The house was quiet again. My reflection in the window looked older, wiser, softer. When the knock came again, another set of officers, a follow-up check, I met them at the door, ready. Come in, I said calmly. I have the full record prepared. One of them smiled slightly, almost respectful. As they left, I watched their patrol car disappear down the hill. The porch light flickered, rain hissing gently against the roof. The war she started had reached the public, but I wasn't afraid of the noise. I had facts, and I had time. I sat at the table, opened my laptop again, and wrote a single sentence in a new file. The truth doesn't scream. It endures. And when the world watched the footage, no one asked what I did, only what they thought they could still take. They wanted to bury me in shame. I gave them facts, and a mirror. It was one of those mornings when the city felt half asleep, fog pressing low over the courthouse, the kind that made everything appear softer than it was. But there was nothing soft about what was coming. Cameras lined the sidewalk, their lenses like glass eyes waiting for a headline. I walked past them quietly, shoulders squared, my breath steady. The banner under one camera read, Family Feud or Fraud? Young scientist fights back. The words didn't sting anymore. They sounded like something happening to someone else. Inside, the courthouse smelled of coffee and nerves. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My lawyer, a man who spoke in clipped sentences, motioned for me to sit beside him. Across the table, Valora sat with her attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, but still polished, foundation flawless, pearl earrings perfectly in place. She held herself like the world owed her understanding. Heath wasn't there. Neither was Leor. The absence of both said more than any testimony could. Her lawyer cleared his throat. We're here because Mrs. Quinn has filed a defamation claim against her daughter. Daughter. The word sat between us like a knife. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear what version of history they'd rehearsed. Valora leaned forward. All I ever did was love her. But she's been spreading lies. Accusing me of things I never did. Her voice trembled on cue. I'm not perfect, but I am still her mother. Her lawyer placed a hand on her wrist. It looked like choreography, an entire performance rehearsed for sympathy. My attorney waited. When it was our turn, he spoke calmly. Your Honor, Ms. Vale has evidence that refutes every claim made against her. He gestured to the folder in front of me. I slid it across the table, the movement deliberate. Inside were printed copies of the police report, the bank's confirmation of the forged loan, screenshots of the Facebook posts, and a transcript of the voicemail where she accused me of destroying the family. But that wasn't what made her eyes flicker. It was the next envelope. The one I placed carefully on top. This, I said softly, is from someone who believed in telling the truth before it was convenient. The judge nodded for me to proceed. I opened the letter. The paper was thin and yellowed, written in the looping cursive of a steadier time. It was my grandmother's handwriting, the same woman who'd once told me that silence could be sacred but never cowardly. If they try to erase your light, I read aloud, remember who first saw it. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. The words carried their own weight. When I finished, no one spoke. Even the clicking pens of the reporters outside seemed to pause. Valora broke first. You'll destroy our name over old wounds? I met her eyes. I didn't destroy our name. I just stopped hiding yours. Her mouth tightened. Do you have any idea what people will say? They'll say what they've always said, I replied. But this time, they'll have the truth. The judge looked down at the documents for a long moment before speaking. The evidence is clear. The case is dismissed. Mrs. Quinn, I suggest you refrain from further contact with your daughter. That was it. No dramatic verdict, no gasps from the gallery. Just the sound of her world quietly collapsing under the weight of its own lies. As we left the room, I heard the buzz of whispers, reporters confirming details, lawyers murmuring about next steps. Valora stayed seated, staring at the table, her hands folded neatly, as if order could undo what had just happened. Outside, the morning had brightened. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, sharp and clean. A few cameras flashed, but I kept walking, each step slow, even. By afternoon, the news had already spread. Judge dismisses family defamation case, evidence confirms misuse of identity. My inbox filled with messages, some from strangers offering support, others from sponsors. One of them was from a research foundation that had withdrawn its funding months earlier because of the rumors. We've reviewed your testimony. We'd like to reinstate your scholarship. The integrity you showed today speaks louder than gossip. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Later that evening, I sat by the window of my villa, a cup of tea warming my palms. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I hadn't realized until that moment how exhausting vindication could feel. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Justice rarely feels like triumph, it feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. News of the case rippled through our old neighborhood. People who once praised Valora began to distance themselves. Her posts disappeared. The comments stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. Lior's business folded within weeks. A short article in the financial section labeled it a promising venture undone by poor management and public scrutiny. He didn't reach out. I didn't expect him to. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just a quiet kind of closure. A few days later, a box arrived at my door. No note. Just my old baby album. Inside, half the photos were missing, torn out neatly, as if erased again. I smiled faintly. Even in retreat, she needed control. I carried the box to the fireplace, opened it, and held one photograph to the light. I was 5, covered in cake frosting, laughing. Valora's hand was in the corner of the frame, reaching toward me. I didn't throw it into the flames. I just set it aside and said softly, the truth stood long enough. You can carry it now. Then I deleted the receipts folder from my laptop, not because I forgave her, but because the evidence had done its work. That night, when I stepped outside, the sky was clear again. The air was cool, steady, kind. I walked down the steps barefoot, feeling the concrete warm from the day's sun. Healing isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It moves slowly, quietly, like the tide reclaiming the shore after a storm. When the reporters called for comment the next morning, I said only one thing: the truth doesn't scream. It endures. And as the dust settled, I realized I never needed revenge. Just my own name back. The first rain of the season tapped gently against my window. 1 year since the soaked lawn, since the night everything that had defined me washed away. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, the kettle whistling softly, steam curling into the air. The smell of black tea and honey filled the room. No deadlines. No reporters. No phone buzzing with someone else's version of my life. Just rain. It didn't sound the same anymore. For years, every drop had felt like rejection, cold, sharp, a reminder of the porch light turning off behind me. Now, it sounded like release. I poured the water carefully, watching the amber swirl. A year ago, I would have been counting the cost of every tea bag, rationing my small comforts. Now, the quiet itself felt like a luxury I had earned. Slowly, gently, I learned that peace doesn't announce itself, it seeps in, steady and silent. The house was warm. The kind of warmth that comes from ownership, not permission. On the windowsill sat a candle, half-burned, wax pooled unevenly. I lit it anyway. My grandmother used to do that when the house felt heavy. She said light doesn't need to win, it just needs to exist. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out her letter. The edges had curled slightly from time, the ink fading but legible. I unfolded it, smoothing the creases with my palm. If they try to erase your light, remember who first saw it. I didn't cry. I just smiled quietly, a small curve of knowing. The woman who wrote those words had seen me before anyone else decided I was invisible. Her handwriting still smelled faintly of lavender soap. I refolded the letter and placed it back in its spot. Outside, thunder murmured somewhere far away, more like a sigh than a threat. I carried my tea to the porch. The air smelled of wet cedar and new beginnings. For the first time in a long while, the rain didn't chase me inside, it invited me to stand still. The mail arrived mid-morning. A thin envelope, hand-addressed, no return label. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my mother's. For a moment, I thought about leaving it sealed. Curiosity won, but barely. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her words were short. "We don't understand you. But we won't interfere again." That was all. No signature. No apology. Just the absence of control, written like surrender. I didn't smile. I didn't tear it up. I slipped it into a folder on the shelf labeled Unsentenced Endings, a collection of letters I'd never replied to, memories I'd stopped trying to fix. As I closed the folder, I realized I didn't need to forgive her to be free of her. Some wounds stop bleeding not because they've healed, but because you stop reopening them. The clock chimed softly from the living room. I turned to find Ava, the young intern I'd started mentoring, standing at the door. She looked nervous, rain dripping from her jacket. "Am I too early?" she asked. "No," I said, smiling. "You're right on time. Come in." She stepped inside, brushing her sleeves. "You live alone, right? Doesn't it ever get lonely?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But it's a good kind of lonely. It's quiet in a way that doesn't hurt." She followed me into the kitchen, eyes wide as she looked around. "This place feels safe," she said. "How do you keep going when everything falls apart?" I set her a mug of tea and leaned against the counter. "By remembering I'm not who they said I was. I never was." She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. For a moment, I saw myself at her age, unsure, hungry for approval, desperate to belong. I wanted to tell her she didn't need to earn her worth. But some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. The rain outside softened, the sound turning almost melodic. Ava smiled, sipping her tea. "You really like the rain, don't you?" I glanced toward the window. "I used to hate it," I said. "It reminded me of that night. But now, it sounds different. It sounds like a promise kept." After she left, the house returned to its steady quiet. I sat at the dining table, the candle flickering low, shadows moving gently along the walls. My phone buzzed, a new email. I ignored it. Not every knock needed answering anymore. I looked around the space I had built. Every piece of furniture was something I had chosen. Every painting, every book, every silence was mine. No one could take credit for it, and no one could rewrite how it came to be. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The old scenes replayed, my soaked suitcases on the lawn, the Laura's voice calling independence a gift, Leor's smug smile when they shut the door. Then the image shifted, sunlight through clean windows, tea steam rising, my name finally belonging to me again. The memories didn't sting anymore. They just existed, like old weather patterns, storms that had already passed. I stood, walked to the front door, and opened it. The rain brushed against my skin, light and cool, like a familiar friend instead of an enemy. I stepped outside, letting it soak my hair, my shoulders, my hands. The air tasted new. "They broke the illusion," I whispered, voice barely audible over the drizzle. "Not me." For a long moment, I stood there, eyes closed, feeling the rain slide down my face. It wasn't punishment anymore. It was proof that I'd survived every version of them. I turned toward the horizon, where the clouds were breaking open into thin streaks of gold. The storm was passing. Quietly, slowly, it left behind clean air, soft light, and a calm I had never known before. Independence, it turned out, wasn't what they gave me. It was what I chose, once I stopped asking for permission. The rain fell softer now, steady as my heartbeat, warm as forgiveness I no longer needed to give. Sometimes, healing isn't about forgiveness, it's about freedom. About learning you don't owe love to those who weaponized it. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? Tell me your story in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are on the way. Stories that speak quietly, but hit deep.